Welcome back, everybody, to C&S Corvettes in Sarasota, Florida. This is your Corvette buddy Lyle, here to talk to you about more interesting, fun Corvette stuff. If you appreciate what we do here, if you find the information valuable, useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, mention us to another Corvette friend of yours, and if you really do get something that saves you money, hit the super thanks down here and give me a tip so I can go buy a beer or a coffee or whatever, you know. Thank you in advance. Today's video is coming to you courtesy of several of our viewers who have requested that I do it. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about the 1996 Corvette LT4. And not only did I have you guys talking about wanting to learn more about the LT4, it just so happens this week we ended up purchasing an LT4 six-speed coupe, torch red, black interior. I think it's one owner with like 57,000 miles on it. And having that car here kind of set off the signal in my head that I should do a video about that engine so that I knew more about it as we move forward prepping this car for sale. By the way, if you want a torch red 96 LT4 coupe, message me in the comments, we can talk. Now, as you're aware, Corvette used the LT1 engine from 92 through 96, but for the last year of 1996 Corvette C4 production, they introduced a high-performance version of the LT1 known as the LT4. That was available only with a stick shift. You could not get it with an automatic. And if you got any stick shift car in 1996 that was a Corvette, you got an LT4. Now, before somebody in the comments says it, I know that somewhere somebody in GM had at least one, maybe two, 96 Corvettes made with the LT4 and an automatic. One of two of those cars does actually exist. It's not in any of the paperwork, but I'm aware that they exist. But 99.999% of LT4 cars were manuals. Okay, what we're going to dig into today, and I'm going to warn you in advance, some of this gets pretty engine wonky. There's a lot of specialized terms and stuff I'm going to cover to delineate the differences between the LT1 and the LT4. Some of the smaller differences I've just kind of skipped over just because I didn't want to have to go into a big explanation of what these things actually were for them to make sense. Most of the things I'm going to go through today in the differences between the engines are hopefully going to make sense to anybody who understands an internal combustion engine, specifically a Chevy V8. So, 1996, there were 6,359 LT4 Corvettes made. Now, stock horsepower on an LT1 was 300 from 92 through 96. The factory rating for the LT4 in 1996 was 330 horses. Now, a 30 horse bump's fairly substantial. It's not world beating, but it is better than nothing. And it takes about 30 horses for the average person to feel it in the seat of their pants when they're driving. So it was definitely an improvement that was able to be felt viscerally, like in your guts, right? Here's the thing. As we get into this, I'm going to go through all of the changes they made and why they made them, and I'll have some pictures showing that so that you can, in your mind, see what I'm talking about. But the best part of this is going to be at the end of the video when I go through some of the testing that Auto Performance Test Lab in Atlanta, Georgia did on these engines, and that's where things get surprising, okay? Now, let's go through and cover some of the upgrades and changes they made in the LT4 to improve its overall performance, power, and all that stuff over the stock LT1. One of the big changes that they made in the valve train was switching from stamped steel rockers hitting the push rods to using roller rockers on top of the push rods, mainly because they were noticing that with the just stamped steel ones, they were getting some goring from the push rods at high RPM, and they knew these LT4s were going to be used probably a little harder than the regular LT1s, so they made that change, allowed everything to flow a lot more smoothly without damaging, especially at high RPM. In the valve springs, they used what they call an egg-shaped spring, wire in the spring, because that was better at high RPM and allowed freer revving without valve lag. There was a revised cylinder head design which incorporated several different things. The main changes were the intake ports were larger by 25 cc's to allow it to breathe in better, and the exhaust port was larger by a fraction, but the cut of it was made differently to allow smoother flow out and increased performance. The valve walls on the underside of the cylinder head were actually moved back from the valve slightly to enhance airflow. There were composite head gaskets used instead of regular head gaskets like there were on the LT1. There was a slightly revised piston design, which took compression from 10.4 to 1 in the LT1 to 10.8 to 1 in the LT4. The fuel system was upgraded. They had 28-pound injectors instead of the 24-pound injectors, and they were flowing 3.5 grams per second rather than 3 grams per second that the LT1 was. Again, all of this was to help along this engine make more power more quickly with more torque. The intake manifold, which is the kind of the eye candy piece of this whole thing, was specifically cast for the LT4. Now, the LT4 heads had a slightly higher port position than the LT1, and this LT4 intake manifold was cast with extra material around the ports so that it could be machined out to mate up to this higher port location on the heads. It was also powder coated in red from the factory, and that helped delineate it from just the normal LT1. The other thing I'll tell you, and you'll see this on some of these cars, oftentimes you'll see a 96 Corvette for sale that says 96 Grand Sport for sale, and it's black or green or white or red. It's not a Grand Sport, because Grand Sports, as we all know, were Admiral Blue with the white hood stripe and the 2 red hash marks and the black wheels, right? Where the confusion comes from is all LT4 Grand Sport engines, have a Grand Sport plate on top of the throttle body. So when you open the hood, you see Grand Sport. So people who don't know the difference between an LT4 engine car and an actual Grand Sport call it a Grand Sport because, hey, it says Grand Sport right there, right? Be aware of that. The only actual Grand Sports were Admiral Blue with the white stripe. Just because the car has an LT4, it doesn't make it not a special car, but it also doesn't make it a Grand Sport. There was a more aggressive, back to the engine, there was more aggressive camshaft design, which helps complement the aforementioned valve train upgrades. There was a specially machined crankshaft that was smoothed out to spin better. There was also a dual mass front torsional dampener that the LT1 didn't have. There was a special timing chain setup made by Cloys for specifically the LT4. A lot of interesting go fast stuff was done to this engine, which just looking at the engine from the outside, you would never know these things were there. That's why I'm telling you about this stuff. Here's the interesting thing though. Remember, GM rated this at 330 horses, a 30 horse bump over the LT1. Not bad, right? You're right. But they also knew they had a new Corvette coming out that was going to be a make or break for the Corvette brand called the C5 the following model year. Now, when this car was put out in 1996, they knew everything there was to know about that car because it was 99% done already. And they knew that the new LS1 all-aluminum engine was going to be making 345 horses. Now, that's important, and I'll tell you why in just a second. Let's go back to Auto Performance Test Lab in Atlanta. They tested 125 completely unmodified LT4 1996 engines, and they found something rather interesting. Do you know that less than 25% of LT4 engines made less than 345 horses? That's right, 75% made 345 horses or more. In fact, 15% of those LT4s made between 360 and 375 horses. 10% made between 375 and 385 horses. And around 2% made in the low 390s. That's right, 390s. Now, there were a couple of engines, one in particular that really stood out. It made 392 horses and 426 pounds-feet of torque. Now, by basis of comparison, 390 and 426 versus the LT1, which put out 300 and 340 respectively. That's a huge jump, guys. Some of these cars could outrun the super high dollar LT5 ZR1. And people were wondering why. That shouldn't be. With only 330 horses, the ZR1 has 405. Why is this happening? This is why. So why did GM put out a number on their high-performance Corvette engine that was low? Well, in my opinion, it was because they knew they had a 345-horse engine coming out in their all-new Corvette, and they didn't want to have the public perceive a horsepower drop from the hot LT engine in 96 to the brand new LS engine in 97. So, as they've done in the past, like in the late 60s, early 70s, when they fudged numbers to make them lower for insurance purposes, I think GM played it very safe. And they said 330. It's a good bump from 300. It's definitely better, but they didn't want to overshadow their upcoming LS1 in 1997 by showing the same or higher horsepower for a previous engine. So in sum, what this means is 75% of the LT4 cars can run with or outrun a stock LS1 engine. So if you have a 2000 Corvette 6-speed on the line with one of these higher horsepower 1996 6-speeds, and they have a drag race, odds are that the 1996 LT4 car is going to run slightly faster than the bone stock C5 would. And GM wasn't really comfortable with that. And I understand why. It's all about marketing. But now you guys have a better understanding of what the LT4 engine was really all about, what went into it, and what power they were really making. So if you own an LT4 and have experiences you want to talk about as far as racing it or driving it, put them in the comments below. If you have questions about the LT4 that I didn't cover here, put them in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and thank you so much for watching.